Let me ask you about the war in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. I got into plenty of trouble about that, too.
You're just a man in a suit talking on microphones and writing brilliant articles. There's also people dying, fighting. It's their land, it's their country, it's their history. This is true for both Russia and Ukraine.
Yep.
It's people trying to ask. They have many dragons, and they're asking themselves a question: who are we? What is this? What is the future of this nation? We thought we are a great nation, and I think both countries say this, and they say, well, how do we become the great nation we thought we are?
Yeah.
And so what, first of all, you got in trouble. What's the dynamics of the trouble?
Jordan Peterson continues to shock interviewers into stunned silence with his extraordinary insights about Vladimir Putin and the Ukrainian war. We're going to offer our own analysis of Peterson's thought, and make sure to stick with me at the very end of this video when we'll find out what kind of future world order Peterson sees rising even now, right before our very eyes. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. It's me, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, here to help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So make sure you smack that bell and subscribe button, and also make sure to click on that link below and head on over to my special website for the Ready Project food supply. We all know that we can't wait for emergencies to happen before we respond to one. And no one, and I mean no one, makes preparing for an emergency more ridiculously easy and affordable than our good friends over at the Ready Project food supply, gang. They are simply the best. Their food kits last up to 25 years in storage. They include breakfast, lunches, and dinners. Every meal is at least 2,000 calories. And if you act right now, you're going to save 25% off a full 4-week emergency supply when you click on that link below to my special website. So whatever you do, gang, don't wait. I got my emergency food supply. Make sure you get yours. Click on that link below or go to getreadywithsteve.com and save 25% off your very own 4-week emergency food supply today. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. Lex Fridman, who is himself Russian, interestingly. He immigrated to the United States when he was around 11 years old. He's a prof over at MIT. He's a very successful YouTube channel and podcast. And he interviewed Jordan Peterson recently on a number of things. And the issue of Vladimir Putin and the Ukrainian conflict came up. And here is what Peterson had to say.
So what, first of all, you got in trouble. What's the dynamics of the trouble? And is there something you regret saying?
No. I thought about it a lot. I laid out 4 reasons for the war. And then I was criticized in the Atlantic for the argument was reduced to one reason, which was a caricature of the reason. I gave a variety of reasons why the war happened. Mismanagement on the part of the West in relationship to Russia and foreign policy since the wall fell. It's understandable because it's extremely complex. Hyper-reliance on Russia as a cardinal source of energy provision for Europe in the wake of idiot environmental globalist utopianism. The expansionist tendencies of Russia that are analogous in some sense to the Soviet Union empire building. And then the last one, which is the one I got in trouble for, which is Putin's belief or willingness to manipulate his people into believing that Russia is a salvific force in the face of idiot Western wokeism. And that's the one I got in trouble for. It's like, while you're justifying Putin, it's like, it's not only the Russians that think the West has lost its mind. The Eastern Europeans think so too. And do I know that? It's like, well, I went to 15 Eastern European countries this spring, and I talked to 300 political and cultural leaders, and you might say, well, they were all conservatives. It's like, actually, no, they weren't. Most of them were conservatives, because it turns out that they're more willing to talk to me, but a good chunk of them were liberals by any stretch of the imagination, and a fair number of them were canceled progressives.
All right, so let's stop there, because those are 4 very, very important points that Jordan just made. I have to say, I haven't heard someone sum up the causation behind this conflict so succinctly as Peterson did just there. Now, the third and fourth point gets developed in the course of the interview, so I want to focus on the first two right now. First and foremost, he pointed to what he called Western mismanagement towards post-Soviet Russia. Particularly here, we're dealing with what is now, I believe, undeniably the disastrous eastward expansion of NATO. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but that is a widely held sentiment among a number of academics, such as John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago, George F. Kennan of Harvard, even Henry Kissinger, who I'm no fan of, but even he recognized that brazen NATO eastward expansion towards Russia was denounced and opposed by every single head of state of Russia, from Gorbachev to Yeltsin to Putin to Medvedev, back to Putin. Every single Russian leader told NATO, back off, don't do that. We consider NATO weapons and troops at our border an existential threat. You have been warned. And our Western leaders turned a deaf ear for the last 2 decades to those warnings, and here we are. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the West's hyper-reliance on Russia for commodities such as food, fuel, and fertilizer because of Western leaders' idiot, environmental, globalist utopianism. That's the actual phrase he used. That would make a great T-shirt. When idiot, environmental, globalist utopianism. In other words, because we wrongly thought we controlled the nations that we relied on for gas and oil and food imports, our liberal globalist leaders decided to forego investing in our own fossil fuel production and instead went full Greta and pushed a bunch of woke green nonsense that we're now paying for because of the boomerang effect of sanctions.
How dare you?
Well, because you're very concerned about the culture wars that perhaps are a signal of a possible bad future for this country and for this part of the world, that reason stands out. And do you, sort of looking back at 4 reasons, think it deserves to have a place in one of the 4?
Oh,
because
absolutely.
Because it is,
well, the 4 was bifurcated, because I said, look, Putin might believe this, and I actually think he does, because I read a bunch of Putin's speeches, and I have been reading them for 15 years. And my sense of people generally, and this was true of Hitler, it's like, well, what did Hitler believe? Well, did you read what he wrote? He just did what he said he was going to do. And you might think, well, some people are so tricky. They have a whole body of elaborated speech that's completely separate from their personality, and their personality is pursuing a different agenda, and this whole body of speech is nothing but a front. Yeah. It's like, good luck finding someone that sophisticated. First of all, if you say things long enough, you're going to believe them.
That's a really interesting and fascinating and important point. Even if you start out as a lie, as a propaganda, I think Hitler is an example of somebody that I think really quickly you start to believe the propaganda.
Well,
I read his speeches. I've been reading Putin for 15 years. This is so crucial for us to understand what's really going on here with Russia and Ukraine. And it's something that our Western pundit class of retired deep state bureaucrats, along with our liberal media elite, have been so radically derelict in. What Peterson just said, in effect, is that there's no better way to understand what a world leader is doing than to look carefully at the explanations provided by the world leader, him or herself. This is what the Canadian scholar Carrie Roberts does so well in her 2017 article on Vladimir Putin, where she utilizes what scholars call discourse analysis in a study of Putin's speeches so as to best discern and understand Russian geopolitics. In other words, our Western globalist pundit class, our liberal elites, will never understand Putin as long as they continue to hold on to the absurd notion that they can explain Putin better than he can explain himself. That they know the man better than the man knows himself. After all, it's precisely these speeches delivered by Putin that's galvanized the Russian people into an overwhelming support of the Ukrainian mission. So this is a very important point that Peterson brings up. And now the question is, having read his speeches, what is Putin doing?
And so I do think Putin believes to the degree that he believes anything, I do believe that he thinks of himself as a bulwark for Christendom against the degeneration of the West. And that's that third way that Dugin and Putin have been talking about, the philosopher Alexander Dugin and Putin, for 15 years. Now, what that is very amorphous. Solzhenitsyn thought the Russians would have to return to the incremental development of Orthodox Christianity to escape from the communist trap. And to some degree, that's happened in Russia because there's been a return to Orthodox Christianity. Now, you could say, yeah, but the Orthodox Church has just been co-opted by the state. And I would say there's some evidence for that. I've heard, for example, that the Metropolitan owns, now I don't know if this is true, owns $5 billion worth of personal property. And I would say there's a bit of a moral hazard in that. And it's possible that the Orthodox Church has been co-opted, but there has been somewhat of an Orthodox revival in Russia, and I don't think that's all bad. Now, even if Putin doesn't believe any of this, if he's just a psychopathic manipulator, and unfortunately, I don't think that's true. I've read his speeches. It doesn't look like it to me, and he is by no means the worst Russian leader of the last 100 years.
Well, there's quite a selection there.
There certainly is. And I say that knowing that. Even if he doesn't believe it, he's convinced his people that it's true. And so we're stuck with the claim in either case. And that's the point I was trying to make in the article.
Now, this for me is where the interview really gets good. All right. So, having read his speeches, having allowed Putin himself to explain himself, what is he doing? According to Peterson, Putin is defending, in a word, Christendom. He's defending the particularly orthodox realm of ancient Christian civilization from the degeneration of the West. And in doing so, he stands firmly in light with the thought of the great Soviet dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who believed that the only way Russia was going to find its way out of the ashes of 70 years of Soviet communism was in the revitalization of the Russian Orthodox Church as the connective tissue, indeed, as the oxygen that sustains a revived Russian world. Now, he mentioned the Russian geopolitical philosopher Alexander Dugin. What makes Dugin so fascinating is that he sees this vision for Russia applying to the whole of the world, meaning that Russia's return to its civilizational roots is but a microcosm of what's happening among virtually all populations across the globe. It's what scholars call retraditionalization, where more and more populations are rejecting Western liberal globalism and returning to nation, culture, custom, and tradition. This is why you have a Neo-Confucian revival going on right now throughout China. This is why you have a Hindu nationalist revival going on in India. This is why you have Eastern Europe turning more and more away from the bullies in Brussels and the EU. According to Dugin, what's happening in Russia is all part of a wholly new yet radically retraditionalist world order rising up that's rapidly replacing the liberal globalist order. Peterson gets that. He seems to have his finger on that. And that's why his third and fourth points, we have to understand, actually coincide with one another. Russia's expansionist sentiments, Peterson's third reason, are not rooted in arbitrary longing for the old days of the Soviet Union and the like. They're inextricably linked to what Peterson calls idiot Western wokeism, which is his fourth point. The last 2 points are absolutely interrelated. And that's why he went on to say that it's not just Russia who thinks we've lost our minds. It's the whole of Eastern Europe. It's the whole of China. It's India. It's the Middle East, where, by the way, more Muslims are currently going to mosque than ever before in the history of Islam. It's the whole of the continent of Africa. It's basically 80% of the world's population. Not to mention perhaps the majority of populations within Western nations themselves. Take a look at what just happened in Italy today. Wokeism is nuts. But it's not just nuts, it's geopolitically disastrous and destabilizing. And if woke warriors thought they could infest NATO with international impunity, they were sorely mistaken. They were dead wrong. And Jordan Peterson, is yet the latest voice to call us all to the realization that much of the horrors that we see out there are but the makings of our own insanities. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You'll definitely want to check out my latest video I just did on Jordan Peterson leaving Piers Morgan absolutely speechless over Vladimir Putin. It takes a lot of what we talked about here in this video and brings it to a whole new level. You're not going to want to miss it. So make sure to click on that link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.